Um, so thank you for being here and welcome. And I just would love to get started by asking you just to tell us about kind of where you're from and what is the path that led you to being the herbal medicine and herb seed expert that you are today.
Oh, I've always loved plants, and as I grew and developed through my early years, I kept trying to find some way where I could be involved with my passion, but also make a living. And so I started out looking at potsherds and old arrowheads and bones, and I engaged in an archaeological career for about a decade, traveled all over the world to different sites. And eventually I found that I was more attracted to green things than old stones and bones. And so that developed into a passion for ethnobotany. And from that, uh, I began to study plants more deeply. They'd always been there sort of in the back of my consciousness, but I started to study plants more deeply. And I found that by growing them, I learned more about them than any other way. So that developed into organic gardening and uh, more research and writing. And uh, I eventually did find my path where I could join my passion with making a livelihood.
And where did you grow up and where were you learning about plants as a young person?
Oh, I was in Iowa City, Iowa during the 50s, and it was a great time. We didn't realize that the world was out there. It was just a little uh, uh, microcosm of uh, river, small town, university life. My days were full of uh, paddling my canoe on the Iowa River and collecting plantain and making plantain stews over little fires that I'd make out of oak twigs, um, snapping turtles, carp, crappies. It was a very fishy kind of childhood, and and uh, later on, I learned that the big world much more was much more challenging, but during my early years, it was really very easy.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And were you surrounded by gardening and growing seeds and medicinal herbs as a kid? Was that part of growing up, or did that come into your life later?
Oh, well, a little bit. I I remember show and tell was my favorite subject in grade school, and I still remember going to show and tell with my little bag of potatoes that I'd grown myself, and on the way back home, the bag split and the potatoes spilled out all over the street, and I had to pick them all up. So there was always a connection with growing things. My mom would take me into the ravines which was in Iowa. It was the only place where you could really find any diversity was in the ravines, where there were small streams and uh, older trees and so forth. And we would, um, slap our hands. We would dig uh, native plants and transplant them back to our gardens at the house.
Hmm.
I wouldn't do that these days, but it's the way it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And then now you're in Oregon, is that right?
Yeah, then we returned after a stint in Africa for 3 years in Kenya and Tanzania. I returned to the United States in 75 and then lived for a year in Iowa. It was just way too cold after Africa. And so then my wife and our first little baby uh, uh, moved back to Oregon, where she was from, and we found 5 acres in the Coast Mountains and really started to learn about. Uh, well, we spent 5 years developing self-sufficiency on a small piece of land in the Oregon Coast Mountains and planting a lot of trees.
Hmm. And is that the same 5 acres you're on now?
Oh, no, not at all. Then we moved to Williams in Southern Oregon, looking for schooling for our, by then 3 kids, uh, and got a place in Earth education at Horizon School in Williams, which is just shy of the California border here. And we eventually did buy our property that we live on right now, which is by Munger's Creek, a great botanical refuge here that we've built with probably about 1,000 different species that we brought in, that we pull from for the popular seed catalog. And then we also bought another 3 pieces of property eventually, to be able to grow different crops in seclusion,
Hmm.
so that we limit hybridization that way. So we have really 4 farms.
Oh, wow. And are they like, how far apart are they from one another? Like, do you have to get in the car to go from one to the next?
Well, you don't have to, you could walk,
Yeah.
but normally we do get in the truck to move around. And yeah, one of them's coastal, and 3 of them are local here in Williams.
Okay, yeah, so good isolation distances.
Yeah, definitely.
Hmm. And I feel like that's something that home gardeners don't always appreciate is that saving seed, depending on the variety, you really have to be careful about that.
Right. Well, we go over that a lot in my books, and like you could just compare and contrast the Asteraceae with the legumes.
Hmm.
And the Asteraceae are outcrossers, right? Calendula. You need hundreds of different individuals to maintain genetic stability. Whereas in the legumes, they're self-fertile. So something like a astragalus plant, you don't worry about having to grow a lot of them to save seed that's genetically stable, because it's just making love to itself anyway. So it's all good.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's talk about your books quickly, and then I have some really specific herbs I want to ask you about. So you've written a lot of books. If people are interested in saving seed and growing their own seed, is there a particular book of yours that's the best for that?
That would be Growing Plant Medicine Volume 1.
Hmm.
That
Great.
has a lot of seed saving information in it. And actually Volume 2 does as well, because there are hundreds of specific monographs, and we go over the reproductive biology of each
Mhm.
plant. Is it self-fertile? Is it an outcrosser? Is it dioecious, that is, with male and female flowers on different plants, or is it monoecious, where the both male and female flowers occur on the same plant, et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera. All that is gone over very specifically with each plant. I
Mhm.
used to think that when I first started saving seed, I was like, oh golly, don't worry about this isolation, don't worry about population size, just get a seed and replant it.
Mhm.
And I did start to realize over the years that it makes sense to actually grow significant populations in isolation, because otherwise you get some really funny looking individuals, some inbreeding depression, and a lack of vitality in the populations that you resell. So we've learned a lot in the seed trade over the last 30 years, and how to time our plantings, and how many individuals are important to maintain genetic diversity and stability, et cetera, et cetera. It's
Mhm.
actually is all in my books.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to reading both of them, volume one and right back to back, just all the way through.
Yeah, a lot of people get confused. They're like, does volume 2 go over the same stuff that volume 1 does? No, if that was the case, you would call it, version 2 or something.
Yeah.
When you say volume 2, that means it's a continuation of volume 1, and there is just a ton of information in there. It's basically everything I know. So you and I don't even need to talk. You could just read the books and it would be better than having my face in front of you. Do I have hat hair? I'm just
No, no
kidding.
head hair. You got, headphone hair.
I got headphone hair.
That's good. So I guess here's a question though, more of a general one for our audience is mostly home gardeners who do some of their own seed saving. And a rule of thumb that I use, and I would love it if you would correct me on this, but is that I save my own seeds for a couple of generations, and then I buy some more seed from someone like you or someone else who's a real seed grower, who's doing all of the proper population sizes to keep the diversity. And I add those back in so that I don't end up completely inbreeding in my own garden, but I also do save some of my own seed to be kind of adapting to my microclimate.
Right. Oh, that's very good. Yeah, it really depends on what species you're talking
Mhm.
about and what family the plant is in,
Mhm.
because different families are going to have various requirements in terms of seed saving.
Mhm.
But the scenario you're suggesting is pretty good for things that are like outcrossers. One bit of advice I might give would be to like, seeds live for usually a couple of years to 6 years, sometimes as long as 100 years. So you can grow, like, for instance, a different tomato every year. If you're
Mhm.
into seed saving, just grow one tomato, grow your mandarins this year,
Mhm.
and save seed from them. And then the next year, grow your old Germans and save seed from them. That way, you're not getting a lot of these older tomato varieties actually do outcross because the
Mhm.
flowers are a little bit more open than the current selections, which tend
Mhm.
to have really closed flowers and are apomictic. They're self-fertile.
Mhm.
So, and then you don't have to limit that to tomatoes. You could do the same thing with basils,
Mhm.
or you could do it with any other plant that has a lot of different cultivars or species that might hybridize. So you could just grow one kind and then save your seed, and your seed will be good for several years. And then
Mhm.
you can go on to something else the next year and create your diversity that way, and also create your seclusion that way.
Mhm.
One other thing, I'm not going to go too much on this, but a crop arrangement that I found to be really, really useful for my purposes when I want to grow, like, I'll grow several different kinds of tomatoes in the garden every year, but I want to separate them both spatially and with uh, biological barriers. And so I'll grow like rows, a row of tomatoes, and then I'll grow a medicinal herb, like maybe an astragalus or something like that. And then I'll grow a pepper variety, because I also, peppers are like self-fertile, but you want to separate them somewhat from each other. And then I'll grow a basil.
Mhm.
And then I can start over again with another tomato, another medicinal herb, another, see how that way uh I'm separating the varieties as far as possible away from each other, but also growing diversity, which is kind of my uh, um, peg that I like to hang my hat on, is the value of the garden of diversity. So I don't worry about it too much. I don't see too many problems coming up from this. I just give it a hat tip of importance and try to keep uh, my rows separated sufficiently so that the plant seed breeds true.
Mhm. Fantastic. So speaking of basils, I have a very specific basil question. It's kind of was basically how I found you as a person. I'd been buying from Strictly Medicinal Seeds for a while, but I hadn't really gone into your blog and into your history. But then I was looking at Wild Garden Seeds, and they had the Marihani basil, which had a little story in it about where the seed came from, and it went linked back to
Oh
you
yeah.
and said that You found the
Yeah.
Rihani basil. That is that it right there?
Yeah, this is one that grew early in the greenhouse. See the roots?
Oh yeah, look at that.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, that
That's
one's
the way a nursery person knows a good plant is if the roots are coming out the bottom. Yeah,
okay.
okay.
I
So
think that
you went to Wild Garden Seeds, which by the way is a amazing resource.
yeah. Oh, I love them. I because I'm kind of a lettuce fanatic personally. I love lettuce and they have so many. So I
Yeah.
get lots and lots of lettuces to try. And then I was poking around and I saw the Rihani basil and I also love basil and I'd never heard of it. And I thought, well, this is a neat story. And it's one of my absolute favorites now. Can you tell us the story of, because it sounds quite, it was just like a one sentence description of you met a person with this interesting basil and she gifted
Yeah,
you some seeds. But
right.
it sounds to me like there's a lot more to that story.
How long do we have?
Oh,
This
I don't know.
this has to do with I believe it was my second Zanzibar seed collecting expedition.
Mhm,
And I was walking, which in Zanzibar, nothing is very far away from anything else. You start on the coast on one side of the island and you start walking and you walk up over the top and the next thing you see is the ocean on the other side of the island, and
mhm,
you got there on your own little feet. So I was pretty much at the apex. I looked out over the uh, waving palm trees, and I could see the waves on the Indian Ocean and the bright diamond sparkling of the waves in the midday sun. And I started walking down the other side and I came to a little hut next to the road and there was a woman sitting outside on one of these typical stone benches that the Zanzibaris make outside their huts to like they pick up the sun and they get really warm and then it's a really warm place to sit. And in her garden there was a beautiful basil plant. And so I stopped and greeted her, and my fluency in Swahili is very useful in this area. So she was surprised, that I was addressing her in her own language, and her name was Fatima. She is wore the burqa, which is typical to the women in the islands. But at the same time, there's an openness of heart and willingness to communicate. So I asked her about the basil, and I said, what's the name of it? And she said, Mrihani. And Mrihani just means broad-leafed basil. It's one of the three different kinds of basils that people in East Africa commonly grow.
mhm.
But I just honored that name, and I asked her if I could if I could get some seeds from it, and she said, "Come back tomorrow." And so I went on my way. I had numerous other adventures. I walked back home again to the city of little town of Wete, which is very famous for its dawaza asili, which is the uh, local herbal medicine and has a lot of active herbalists and herb selling stalls and this kind of thing. I was staying there for some weeks, and I had my dinner at the Sharouk's guest house, and it was octopus again. And then I went back this next day to visit Fatima, and she gave me this little newspaper triangle uh, uh, that had the Mrihani seeds inside. So I included these in with my all the other seed accessions. There were 70 accessions from my stay in Zanzibar, and then I put them in um, a red bag and I put it at the bottom of my luggage. And I took the precaution of going to the local authorities and getting a phytosanitary certificate. I already had an import permit from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, so everything was on the up and up. And when I got to CTEC, the customs inspector took the red bag, confiscated it, said, we don't recognize the phytosanitary certificate from Zanzibar. There's no such country as Zanzibar, and your import permit is therefore invalid. So they took 3 weeks worth of effort in seed cleaning, and the Marihani basil was in there. But they also said that, given the fact that I'd been honest with them, declaring the items, and that I had the import permit and this and that, that they would give me a telephone number and allow me to call them up and let them go through the seeds one at a time. Well, they threw almost everything out, which was a damn shame. But I begged them. I said, well, let the basils through anyway. You know what a basil is, right? Ocimum basilicum is very standard. It's not going to hurt anybody. It's not an invasive species. Just let the basils through. And so I talked to a very nice lady there who, after like 3 phone calls, whispered to me, by the way, I really have faith in what you're doing. And I need to let you know that your seeds are crawling with bugs. And I'm like, well, sure, there was probably, a larvae in some of those seeds. But if you guys hadn't held on to it for 3 weeks to a month or however long it was, it never would have been a problem. I would have just planted them here. They would have, the ones that were no good would have died. The bugs would have not found a place, da 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 da. Anyway, she said, okay, I'm going to send you your basils. So she sent me the basils, and we have a disclaimer in the catalog that says no genetic modification from any of our seed species. These are a free gift to the world as the public domain. So they're public domain seeds, but some scientists out in the East Coast got a hold of Marihani basil. They shortened the name of it to MRI, MRI, which sounded like an acronym to them, so it was more appropriate for science. And they tore it apart. They found a gene in there that bestows downy mildew resistance to basils, and they injected that gene into a line of basils, which is now, Prospera and all this stuff. They say that they're not genetically modified basils, but they really are. And it started an entire industry that went into other seed companies worldwide, and is the basis for many different varieties of select basils that have a downy mildew resistance. And apparently downy mildew is a real problem with basil growing out east, because they have a lot of like moisture that we don't experience out here in the West. For me, it's like no big deal, because we have these dry nights, cold, dry nights, dry days, long autumns, which is great for seed saving. So they eventually got back to me and they said, oh, by the way, we used your basil to, create a whole line of downy mildew resistant basils. I thought you'd like to know that. And I'm kind of like, hey, look at this language in the catalog. You weren't supposed to do that. And they said, screw you.
Oh, well.
And so I didn't really want to like end up in court. I just decided that I would let it go. And I still grow the original Marihani basil that's good in and of itself. We don't have to tear the genetics apart in order to appreciate it.
Yeah, when I grow it too, and I absolutely love it. And when I share it with friends and family, because I grow a lot of seedlings too. So I give my gardening friends seedlings, and then my non-gardening friends, I just, give them bunches of the basil, and everybody just loves it.
That's why we're talking today, is because you're so nice. Otherwise, I never would have agreed to do this.
I've been stalking you for years. Thank you. So here's another question about basils and Tulsi basil, which I am discovered also through you, which, I know it's not a mysterious plant in the world. There we go. You've got one. Yeah, I've got mine just right over here too, but mine are only about that big. So I know there's a lot of medicinal value in Tulsi basil. Is it also in Marihani, or is it also in Genovese, the typical pesto basils, or is it really just in Tulsi basil? And how do you recommend people use it and incorporate it in their lives?
Well, these are different species, aren't they? And Ocimum basilicum is the culinary basil
Hmm.
and has many different cultivars, Genovese, Mrihani, Thai basil,
Hmm.
um, broadleaf basil, um, sweet basil. All
Hmm.
these are Ocimum basilicum. I mean, yeah, Ocimum basilicum. So those are considered in Western herbal medicine to be a stomachic. In other words, it is anti-nauseant and helps you, digest your food, and um, a source of pesto, which is an incredible vegetarian meal that comes, inexpensive and universally appreciated vegetarian meal that comes right out of the garden. Um, so those are all the standard common basils. Uh, it's good food, and it has a stomachic type of activity, anti spasmodic, if you will.
Hmm.
But then a different species, Ocimum tenuiflorum. The tenuiflorum means small flowered. That is what we know as tulsi, and it comes from the continent of India. And there are, again, in the tulsis, or the Ocimum tenuiflorum, there are several different cultivars or types. A cultivar is like where gardeners get into the original type and they select it for certain traits. So we have Rama Tulsi, which is green, and Krishna Tulsi, which is more of a um, purple color. And these are tropical perennials, which are generally grown as temperate annuals in our gardens here in the temperate north. Although you can overwinter one in a heated greenhouse and have it the next year, it gets woodier and woodier and goes to seed, flower and seed earlier in the year than one that you would plant from seed. So this is the Krishna Tulsi here. You can see the intensely purple coloration on the stem there. And as
Hmm.
it grows and matures, it's going to be more and more purple on the leaf. And there will be some variation because we're not talking about hybrids, which are generally very, very similar when you grow them out. We're talking about open pollinated plants that will have uh, some innate diversity. So Krishna Tulsi is uh, preferred by many and has a very spicy kind of taste to it, which can be partially attributed to the presence of oil of clove, eugenol, an essential oil. So that is very antiseptic in its activity. And the Tulsi tea is a great starter herb for any beginning herbalist. You can use Tulsi tea for treating the big C. You can use it for treating the common cold. You can use it for treating upset stomach. It's immune enhancing, adaptogenic, as it were.
Hmm.
It is delicious, and uh, there's a long standing tradition among Vedic people to pray to the Tulsi plant. It's considered to be a manifestation of Devi, the female deity on earth. And many will water the Tulsi in the morning and then pray and take one leaf and chew it. And the Krishna Tulsi is very tasty, and it has a really smooth leaf, so it's easy to do that. And that's a practice that I've adopted, and I find that it helps me stay present in my life. It's a sort of a plant-based meditation, as it were,
Hmm.
slash prayer. And uh, the tulsi is planted next to the door in India, or often around the temples, and so it's considered to bring good luck and good fortune, in a general sense, to anyone who respects it.
Hmm. Oh, that's beautiful. And so here's kind of a general, very beginner question when we're talking about medicinal herbs. You said Tulsi tea can treat all of these many things, from kind of a cold to an upset stomach. Is it a good idea to just have it just because also, or should you be thinking about, because I think in our Western mindset, when it comes to medicine, you think, I have a symptom, what's the thing I take for the symptom, right? Should we be thinking about Tulsi tea in that way? Like, I've got a stomach ache, I should have some Tulsi tea. Or should it be something that, like, it's safe and effective and you just kind of have it every day as a way to kind of just boost your immune system in an ongoing basis? Or am I thinking, is that too much of a dichotomy? Am I thinking
And
about
you
it wrong?
always answer your own questions, don't you?
I don't
You,
know. I
I
don't.
think you should take over.
No, I don't. I honestly don't know
No,
how,
both
what's.
all of the above. It's both preventive and curative.
Mhm,
So, and it also combines well with everything. So, if you're treating a disease state, then you can take the Tulsi tea in the morning, and you can also take your burdock and dandelion tincture if you're trying to treat staph or something of that nature. It
mhm,
it uh, it combines well with all these, with any other therapy.
mhm,
So, at the same time, it's preventive. So, maybe if you drink Tulsi tea every morning, you won't get sick, and you can also, like, use it for working with habituation, like,
mhm,
um, for instance, marijuana habituation, or caffeine dependency, um, these kinds of things. You can, instead, like, wake up in the morning, and instead of lighting up a doob, or making a cup of coffee, you instead uh, sit and meditate, and drink your little Tulsi tea, and you feel, just at first, you think it's not doing anything, but you have to have a
mhm.
little bit of faith. And after some time, after overcoming your negative tendencies, then you start to feel the benefits of this more positive input to your body. Do you want me to read a poem?
Sure.
Okay. This is at the beginning of Growing Plant Medicine, Volume 2.
Mhm.
It's called Tulsi Tea. Sitting with tea, me, myself, and me, wondering internally, how can I be free? Who is this me that sips the tea? Is it my body, knuckle, elbow, and knee? Is it this mind that won't let me be like a dog tortured by a flea? Is it this heart, the seat of my love, sometimes locked? Surrender the key. This tiny voice speaks internally, keeps me on course, makes me like a tree. So I sit with my tea, abandon mind and me, let love shine out. Eternity.
That's all we need to know about Tulsi,
It's right there.
right there. Um, Fantastic. Okay, we could talk about Tulsi and basils forever, but I have another question. This is kind of a personal one about lemon balm. Um, and I think this might be something helpful to everyone else who's listening too. It's a fear that I have about herbal medicine, having grown up with doctors who tell me what I'm supposed to do and, don't do this without the advice of a doctor. And whenever I write about my very fledgling medicinal herb journey, I always say, hey, don't take my word for it. I actually don't know what I'm doing. I'm just learning. So there's lemon balm growing in my yard. It was here when I moved in. And I think it took me 2 to 3 years to even know what it was. It was just kind of this pretty thing that was growing and it smelled kind of nice. And then I remember seeing some segment on like a TV show about gardening, and someone was talking about lemon balm and they showed a picture of it. And I said, oh, I recognize that. I think I have that. And then I crushed it and I smelled it. And I said, that smells kind of lemony, but kind of not. Like it wasn't straight lemon. So then was very reluctant, right? I was afraid because I wasn't sure I had the right thing. But it has the square stem, it smells lemonish. And I've now kind of moved away from the fear that it's not lemon balm and I shouldn't eat it because it's poison. Because you don't want to eat things that you don't know what they are. Anyway, what would you say to people who are kind of in that stage of the journey of being a little bit afraid of finding an herb, and maybe it isn't actually the thing that I think it is, and even if I'm pretty sure it's the thing I think it is because I planted it, is it safe to use medicinally? Because it's a different world. You're not under the supervision of a doctor who says, take one of these pills every day for this amount of time, and you just follow instructions. It's more making your own decisions. So how would you advise someone like me who's beginning and people who are watching to approach their gardens as a source of medicine? How do you do that safely as a beginner?
Well, one time I took the advice of a doctor and he gave me a schedule of things to take, and it took me about 2 years to recover from doing that. Uh,
Exactly. Yeah,
uh,
no,
uh,
doctors don't have the
uh,
answers either necessarily.
lemon
Sure.
balm, lemon balm is a great herb. It has it's entirely safe. You can eat the leaves, or you can dry the leaves and then make a tea. When you make teas, it usually works best to dry the material first and then crush it and make a tea out of it, because that makes the cell structure and the essential oils be more available for extraction by the hot water.
Mhm.
Okay, so first of all, we mustn't be motivated by fear. If we're motivated by fear, then we're already off on the wrong foot. So it's better to be motivated by faith, and yet that needs to be based in secure knowledge. So, so instead of being afraid, just ask the question, uh, how can I know this plant more deeply? And so making plant medicine is my first book. Um, this has been it's a book that describes the adventures of the Cech family, and then moves into uh, an herba and a materia medica, which describes the uh, identity, use, and activity and contraindications, preparations for uh, a couple hundred different herbs that you can grow in your home garden. Um, yes, identity is always foremost. Let's identify things properly before we study them. Otherwise, we're studying the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's true in herbal manufacturing as well. Like, you always have to prove that the starter material is correctly identified. Don't use your ID app on your cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are wrong too often, and even if they're wrong once, that's already taking you in the wrong direction. Get your seeds from strictly medicinal seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Grow them in your garden. You know where you planted them. Keep them well labeled. Um, when they grow and prosper, then you know what it is because it was already labeled properly from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
and so move on in that direction. I honestly, have done exactly the same thing. That's no different from what I did to start. I got a copy of Greaves' Herbal, 2 volume set. Volume
Mhm.
1 and volume 2 are different. They've got different stuff in them. Don't be thinking that volume 2 has what volume 1 has in it. That's just not the way the world works. Um, and and I found this really fascinating write up on mullein. I didn't know that I had mullein growing all around me. I've got some mullein seeds from a seed company. I planted them. I raised it up. I finally was able to make the connection between the mullein that I had grown and that which was out everywhere else on the roadside and in the mountains and what have you. So uh, uh, then I knew because I'd grown it myself. So I really think that's the primary approach. Another would be to, get some good herbal education. Um, there are also quite a few books out there on plant ID that can be helpful. One
Mhm.
is like um, the Western medicinal plants by Hobbs and um, trying to, oh yes, I think they're, oh, I haven't used it for so long. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on it. There are some plant ID books out there that have pictures of the plants, and that's can be helpful.
Yeah.
And talk to your local herbalist, and do take it with a grain of salt because they might also be uh, misguided. But a dandelion is pretty easily recognized, and it's a good starter herb for people. Dent de lion, the teeth of the lion. It has the deeply indented, pointed margin on the leaf. It has the flower, which you can readily recognize and differentiate from lookalikes. Uh, you can pluck the stem, and it will exude a white latex. You can taste it. It tastes bitter to the taste. Um, Although, this isn't a good way to identify aconite, but if you're looking at Asteraceae tend to be generally non-toxic and at least in very small quantities. So a taste test can be useful. And so you begin your uh, herbal repertoire with plants that you know and trust, and you move forward and through by growing new plants every year and connecting with resources that are dependable. And it really doesn't include internet searches. Internet searches will bring up all kinds of uh, misinformation that is put there because information is king, and everybody wants to have more content. And so they'll just blurt out some kind of content, even though they have no uh, respect, responsibility, uh, or knowledge about it. So it's hard to separate from the wheat from the chaff on the internet. Um, Although there are some good resources, and one that I would recommend is Plants of the World Online. That's KEW Gardens. That's going to give you uh, botanist um, botanist filtered plant ID and taxonomy that without any advertisements or any uh, uh, other other reasons for being besides a love of uh, keeping track of what plants are, where they are, what families they belong to, and what they look like.
Mhm. That's good to know that that's a resource we can just go there to identify something.
Absolutely.
Hmm. So
Yeah.
that one is Plants of the World Online, Kew Gardens,
Yep.
the Kew Botanical Gardens in England, that place.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
That place, that's where the uh batty English gardeners have been bringing in plants from the colonies over the decades.
Hmm.
And they're the most of those places are no longer English colonies, but the plants remain. You don't
Hmm.
have to you don't have to repatriate the plants. The plants have lives of their own.
Yeah. And that's a whole other very interesting topic is kind of how ethnobotany is tied up with colonialism that way. But I think we can if we want to do this again, we can dive deep into that. But it's great that Kew Gardens is still maintaining that resource so that we can all go find out. Okay, let's see. I have I think one more question before we move on to
I mean, what the heck? Dandelions are native to Europe. Does that mean I shouldn't use one?
no, I don't, and exactly, I don't think that means it at all. I think it's mostly just the interesting I heard a talk once at a botanical garden by an ethnobotanist who it was the skeletons in the closet of ethnobotany and how much the like in the colonial era, the ethnobotanist was part of the kind of colonial Christian expansion mission. You know, it was like you couldn't really tease those two apart. And so the history of many plants is tied up very much with
Mutiny on the Bounty. Yes.
all of the above.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, so let's see, before I get to my very last questions, we've got several people here. Does anyone have any questions? You can either unmute yourself to ask it or put it in the chat. Um, and while we're waiting for someone to jump in with a question, there was one earlier that I got via email that I'll ask you, which is, um, saving seed from calendula. They were wondering if it's best to clip the seed heads before they're fully dry on the plant and dry them indoors, or wait for the seeds to form on the plant and dry outdoors and then bring them in.
That's a good question that um just to back up a little bit, we normally grow all of our own calendula
Mhm.
for resale, but there was a local gardener who really insisted that they wanted a quotes unquote contract with us. And just because they were local and because we wanted to support them, we said, okay, well, grow the orange calendula this year. And they did an awesome job growing the orange calendula. I could see it from the road. It was just a beautiful, beautiful patch, big patch. And I thought, oh, we're going to have such great orange calendula seed this year, um, looking forward to it. And then when the seed came from them, I was really disappointed because it was all kind of immature. And
Mm.
so instead of being like having the blackness of the those little curled up alligators that are on the what was the disc flower
Mhm.
of this Asteraceae, they were whitish. So I immediately uh, made a planting of them, and it was acceptable. I didn't think that they came up as well as the ones that we tend to grow that are fully mature.
Mhm.
And it really confused me because trying to like pick calendula seed that's almost ripe and bring it indoors and dry it out further and rub it out. Oh God, so much work. So what you do is instead, when the plants are peaking and you're seeing that they're beginning to like lose their ligules, which are the
Mhm.
ray flowers, the orange part or yellow part is falling off, and the seed head is beginning to form kind of a clustery, curly thing.
Mhm.
You take it off the irrigation. Don't
Mm.
water it anymore. And then that's going to help it dry out and mature. And then when you tug up on the seed head should have black seeds in it. And when you tug up on it, it should detach easily from the stem. If it doesn't detach easily from the stem, don't harvest it. When you get a whole lot of them, you can take a bucket, 5-gallon bucket, and put it between your knees and just grab the top of the plant and rub it between the palms of your hands. And, I mean, you might want to wear gloves. I don't need to. My hands are tough as gloves. And all the mature seed is just going to dehiss, shatter out,
Mm-hmm.
and fall in the bucket. And whatever isn't ready is not going to rub out. So that's the answer to your question. Don't pick it and cause more work to yourself and create a inferior, immature product. Instead, watch the plant. It's always the case every day, making a little walkabout, and looking at all the different patches of plants and letting them speak to you, and harvesting the seed when it's completely done before it's fallen off the plant itself. Just at that, uh, it's the nuances that count. See, that's where you learn your herbalism, is that you begin to identify these nuances. So there's this time between the full ripeness of the seed before it shatters and falls from the plant. That's when you harvest it. It's a 2 or 3 day period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so you've got another question here is how many feet apart are your rows of different tomato varieties in your garden?
Okay, so if you want to look at isolation distances, um, there's just a second, I'm going to get it.
Let's see, and if there's any other questions, you guys can put them in the chat or um, just unmute yourself. Okay,
Organic seed grower by Navazio. Can you still hear me?
yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you're really into it, you'll jump for the book, The Organic Seed Grower by Navazio. And he's done a very good job talking about all the common vegetables. So tomatoes is in there. Tomatoes are self-fertile. I was originally told that they were wind pollinated. That is
Mm-hmm.
incorrect.
Yep.
They're self-fertile, and so they don't need to be separated too far apart. In my gardens, they're going to be separated by the distance of 5 rows. And my rows are basically what other people would call beds. I'm getting old. I can't grow herbs in beds anymore. It's just too much work. I just grow in rows that I can keep clean with a rototiller very easily. And I leave my paths between the rows grassed up, or in the cover crop, as it were, and they can be mowed. And then that's a place for the mycelia to live, and to disallow erosion and so forth and so on. Human access. So there are going to be, oh, I don't know, 30 feet apart, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
in
Gotcha.
a, in answer to your question.
Yeah.
Yep.
So final question is knowing what you know now, what do you say to folks? Because pretty much everybody, as I've been talking about this conversation and what people are interested to know, the main thing is kind of like, what do I do? How do you start? So knowing what you know now, I mean, we've already covered a lot of it, but what would be kind of the couple of things you would do, practical things you would do over the next month or so if you wanted to start growing your own medicine this summer? Not all of it, obviously, but to just get started, what would be your couple of steps
Right.
you could do?
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense, to do that. And you start You start small, and everything is cyclic, right? In nature, everything is around. So you want to experience a successful cycle of even just one plant for starting, because well begun is half done. And uh, that plant might be comfrey. That would be an obvious starter plant because it builds soil and brings in a lot of great pollinators, and it's a multi dimensional medicinal herb, um, and also a permaculture plant, good for other plants, um, and makes food, fodder, and medicine, doesn't it? So you would bring that in, and then you would experiment with it. You would make some comfrey salve. You would um, use some comfrey leaves in the um, compost pile as a biodynamic starter. You would make some sun tea and use it on your petunias to green them up. You would uh, maybe rub some fresh leaves and give it to your goats when they have the scours, and cure your goats that way. Um, and then you would collect some seed from it and plant some seeds the next year, and the cycle would start all over again now, wouldn't it? So comfrey would be a good one. Calendula obviously would be a good one. I mean, what's a good comfrey salve without some calendula in there? You need some anti-inflammatory activity and some antiseptic activity along with your cell proliferating activity. So that's a very good herbal combination, isn't it? Then the calendula and the comfrey. So then you'd also keep your eyes out for the volunteers like chickweed would be coming in, and the chickweed is full of saponins, isn't it? And soapy like molecules are cleansing. It comes in a plant form, so it's not the same as eating a bar of soap. That wouldn't be good for you, but it would be good for you to eat the uh, chickweed in season. And then you could also dry some, and you could put that in with your comfrey and your calendula, and now you've got chickweed going in there too. And chickweed has saponins that make water wetter, uh, um, meaning they increase the cleaning power of water, just like if you were doing your dishes and you dropped a drop of dish soap in there, it cuts the grease. So it does that in your body. And one of the really cool aspects of little Stellaria media, right? Chickweed, is that it's going to um, um, increase the activity of other herbs that you put it with. So it's like a multiplication sign, which is going to uh, increase the positive attributes of other plants that it's contributed to. One time back in the early days at Herb Farm, Herbal Ed Salve, we were making Herbal Ed Salve, and chickweed was a pain in the butt to try to get it in season and have enough of it for the year, and it's just only there in the spring and the fall, and it's always mixed in with grasses, and it's wet and hard to dry down and this and that. And we thought, well, let's just take the chickweed out. This is just too much of a hassle to have it. So we tried some salve without the chickweed, and it was only like 5% of the formula, and the salve wasn't as good.
Hmm.
So we had to put the chickweed back in.
Even though it was a pain.
It was a pain, and it was only 5% of the formula, but
Mhm.
we had to put it back in
Yeah.
because we knew
Well,
that
I
it
bet
was
about a lot of
not
us have
good.
chickweed right now. Like we could just go outside and get some
Yeah,
this time of year.
put some in your salads. And if it softens your stools, don't be afraid. That's what is supposed a spring cleanser is supposed to do. Okay, so then nettles. certainly, something like that that is just so full of vibrant energy. You want to experiment around with nettles and get all your uh, you know mineral content going and build your blood. Um, um, chamomile, chamomile, uh, quick, such a quick little thing. And so walking through a chamomile patch is like transporting your spirit to the Elysian fields. You'll get a little bit sleepy. You'll feel the pain go away. So grow some chamomile for tea just in case your kids had too much sugar and they're all hyper and they don't want to go to bed at night. I mean, what did Peter Rabbit's mom give to poor Peter when he ate too much vegetation from Mr. McGregor's garden? Chamomile tea, sedative to the digestion. And if you sedate the digestion, then all the chi just starts to move down away from the head, and you can go get sleepy that way. Um, so these there's a seed set that I produced for strictly medicinal seeds that you can find. It's got one packet each of these different starter seeds, and it's called First Time uh,
Mm.
Herb Garden. And that would be recommended. Just plant all those seeds, and if even just two or three of them do well for you, then you've certainly got a good start. That's what I would suggest, would be to just get right in, have faith, plant a seed, see if it works. If it doesn't work, don't worry about it. That's selection.
Mhm.
Selection is one of the standards of nature. Um, you if a plant does well for you, then it's meant to be there. Examine it more thoroughly. There are many deep aspects to herbalism. It's an unending discipline. You'll never reach the end of it. And that is why I think it fascinates so many people. My dad, uh, bless his soul, he's passed, but he used to love to ask questions. And he really didn't like it when you gave him an answer. He was just asking the question to try to drive your mind deeper. And
Mhm.
he had no interest whatsoever in a quick answer and a dismissal of the question. To him, the question was more important than the answer.
Wow. Okay. Well, we're already way over time. I think that's probably the perfect thing to end on, that the question is more important than the answer. Um, Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for staying late and finishing up that last question with us. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And yeah, that's it. I'm going to put the recording up. We can look back at it, and I'm going to go through and find all these links, and I'll put them in like the comments so that people can find their way to the various resources you mentioned. Any last things you want to say to everybody?
Well, I would like you to get my books.
We would like
Um,
to too.
I think many of you already have, and I thank you for doing so. Um, it really helps my family when you do, and I just get a lot of questions, and the questions are all answered in the books. And so I think that it's worth a read. And if you want to get the books, you can go to Strictly Medicinal Seeds. Book shipping is free within the continental United States, so you don't have to pay for shipping. Don't feed the Amazon beast. There's another option too for anybody who's international or wants free shipping on a single book. You can get free shipping on a single book at herbalreads.com. That's my book selling website, and that's a good place to buy the books as well. And so I appreciate your kind attention on that. Um, I really don't have anything else to say. The book says it all, and probably better than I can with my diminished memory. So please please support us, and I wish you a good gardening year, and always act from faith and walk in peace.
Thank you very much. Really, really appreciate you taking the time. That feel so lucky after, I think I've been emailing you like every few months for, I don't know, a year and a half now. And so it's wonderful to finally meet you and talk. And yeah, I'm feeling so inspired to go out in my garden, harvest some of the herbs I already have and start sowing a bunch that I don't.
My pleasure, Anne.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for coming. See you later.